where in the production of this film did the optimism that is still there leave you? Because we see so much hope still in this documentary for some kind of peaceful dynamic changing the development in Afghanistan. And what we're seeing now in Afghanistan is actually a complete military solution in favor of the Taliban. And why is that, in your view? Why has it come the way it has come?
As of today, maybe I'm wrong and you can correct me, but that seems like less of a risk today. Today it seems more likely that the Taliban will consolidate their military takeover of the country. Levels of battle deaths on the battlefield will go down. I'm not saying that's a good thing, I'm just describing what's happening. And that the small insurgencies that the Taliban will continue to face in the eastern mountains against the Salafists, ISKP, Daesh, and in the northern mountains against the Panshiris, against the so-called resistance, the remnants of the security forces, that those two wars will be smaller. And so, yeah, as usual, the stupid white guy was wrong. Nothing like what we expected happened. And in some ways, that's the story of Afghanistan. That foreigners like myself, even people who have spent a lot of time in the country, don't understand the country. And so that's why it was important for me in this film to, you mostly heard Afghan speaking. The filmmakers insisted on having me speak as well, and I very reluctantly did. But the voices that you saw are kind of a selection of people from all different walks of life. And I would just say, like, one of the sad things for me is that a lot of the people you saw in this film have now evacuated the country. Almost all of them. In fact, the one guy who hasn't, three people haven't. Bismillah Watandos, the peace activist from the south. If anyone knows a way to help him escape Kandahar, I'm looking. And Mariam and Adiba, these two photography students in Kabul, they also have not escaped. But a lot of them have escaped. And I think that tells you something, because we tried to film people from all different political leanings in the country. And now a lot of them are gone. And so what you're likely to see is the Taliban trying to monopolize the political space. And that's where we are today.
Zarifa, if we outsiders don't understand this country, maybe you can help us there. As the first female mayor in Afghanistan, you were a part of the success of this democratic project that was now defeated militarily by the Taliban. And let's widen the scope of this question a bit. In general, across the history of this republic, did this democratic project fail because it failed militarily on the battlefield? Or were the soldiers of this republic defeated because the democratic project failed? What's the origin of the thing?
I lost my dad because of whatever it is. My dad was also a soldier. He served his country for 36 years old. And then myself got 3 attacks and survived all this thing. But the failure of Afghanistan, and especially failure for new generation and the women of Afghanistan specifically and in particular, it's not something to end a war. It's not something to win something. It is something about destroying a nation, whatever happened in America. It was destroying a generation. It was abandoning a nation and a generation. It was like kind of big genocide of a nation. A big genocide of a nation. 20 years international community paid amount of dollars. They took most of them back to their countries, back with themselves. And everyone knows that this theory. The people who were earning had $1,000 in US or out of Afghanistan, they were earning for just 1 month more than $5,000 in Afghanistan. And these dollars were the same dollars that they were paying the Afghan government. So yeah, they took lots of them back to them, with them to their countries. But we Afghans, we paid lives, we paid dreams, we paid hopes, we paid a big amount of blood. I paid my dad's life for at least being the voice of my generation. My dad was killed just because of me, just because of my voice. And I know this, and when you know this, it's like the pain that you can't explain it by words or explain it by your tears. So this is exactly what happened in Afghanistan. They abandoned us, and more importantly, why the democratic system or project failed. Democratic project, as you say, it was always a project for everyone. It wasn't something to really implement humanitarian basic life for humans in Afghanistan. It wasn't something like that. Everyone tried to use Afghanistan as a project for themselves, all around the world. And everyone knows it. Human rights, women rights, like women rights. You know, women rights for Afghan government, it was just a project to earn money from Western or from international community. Bringing a woman as a minister on top chair, putting it like slogans, videos, interviews on internet and social media, that big achievement for Afghan government. But that woman was the woman who was really, really surviving the big stupid things in her life just because of being in that chair and like so-called minister, just like by the name a minister. Like the same for everything else in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, too many, like if it was corruption, we believe Afghan government had problem with corruption, we are accepting it so clearly. But the biggest part of this corruption was international community themselves. Why military forces failed in Afghanistan? They were not receiving their salaries. They were not receiving best weapons as the best as Taliban were receiving. They were not receiving at least their food to eat. I know those people, I'm really sorry to say it so publicly, I know those soldiers, I know it personally, I have been in contact with them for months and months. They were fighting and they had nothing to drink, and I'm sorry, they had to eat their pee. They had to drink their pee. It's horrible. When you have this in 2021, it's horrible. It's really, really horrible. I know the soldiers who were begging for air support, but they were not receiving. I know those people who were, just leaving weapons and surrendering to Taliban just because they were like, I'll die for nothing and my family are just more than 2 months, they have no food to eat, then why I'm dying here? So, it wasn't like, they made us go through this. And why democratic project failed? It was because the republic or democracy for humans as a human right. It should be as a human right. It should be as a basic right, in particular for everyone. But in Afghanistan, it was just a project of whatever.
And you, Mariam, have also worked with the Afghan government. You have been an advisor to two national security advisors of the Ashraf Ghani government, the last government of the Republic in place. How do you see the view that Zarifa has just presented, and what would you say, what's the share of the political class of Afghanistan in this figure?
Very few women in Afghanistan will be so blunt to say that the United States only used women's rights as a project. But this is a clear indication that women's rights was not really upheld, and it was nothing but a superficial campaign. and mostly so in urban areas than in the rural areas. That's why in most of my discussions I always say that Kabul is very disconnected from the rest of Afghanistan. This does not diminish the kind of efforts that the international community has really tried, especially humanitarian efforts and the support by the people to the country. It is just a prime example that a few elites were able to monopolize the platform of Afghanistan. It was either because they were a warlord of some sort and they were brought back into power and misused. I know there were many indications that certain females were brought into power by a warlord just so the warlord could get benefits of that. And if you would speak out against this, you would receive a huge backlash like I did in 2018. Zarifa is a prime example that when she was actually hired, I don't know if she shared the story with you, but I'm going to take the liberty to do so. When she was originally looking for the position to work in the government, her document was signed, but for months she wasn't able to uphold her position because there was so much monopoly and a certain type of game in the government of people paying for certain positions and receiving that position. If Zarifa did not take her work to social media and call out individuals, she probably would have not received her position. I know that women's rights is a very sensitive topic to my heart, running a huge organization, having orphanages in Afghanistan, having clinics, and working with the ground people. But what's really important is what the women want. When I would go into the provinces and I would tell the women, hey, would you like to get politically active? They would look at me in a way that, what are you talking about? I just want access to education. I want access to healthcare. I want access to a certain level of job, because Wardak, that's only about 60 miles outside of Kabul, had no job employments for girls. Outside of the capital of Wardak, which is Maidan, there's no electricity. Many of the public lack the basic information that 40 to 45% of Afghanistan lacks electricity, does not properly have proper running water. The basics that people need to have access to, and the amount of trillions of dollars that has been entered into Afghanistan, we're still owing our neighbors money for borrowing electricity, over millions. I'm quite devastated at the fact that Ghani had a possibility to bring a possible solution with the Taliban to have some sort of integrated, inclusive government. But the fact that he fled and put his needs first and caused such a chaos that right now inside Afghanistan, I'm starting to see an ethnic division, and even the Afghans that are outside of Afghanistan are starting to show ethnic division. It's so concerning and scary because I don't think Ghani only damaged the political system, but he actually damaged the root integrity and pride of the Afghan people. He shook it to its core. And right now, I think the struggle lies is how are we going to come back together, and how are we going to work with whoever's in power, whether that may be a democratic administration or the Afghan Taliban. One of the struggles that I face and the backlash that I face is that I'm constantly saying that these people are in power. And in order for us to reach the 35 million plus that are their citizens, how else can we go about this? Emotions are very high, and all of the Afghans around the world hold grievances. And mostly so because we, the outside public, are in civilized nations that have their own struggle in governance. So when we look at Afghanistan, we're so devastated to see how backwards things are going. But instead of chaos and rightfully blaming individuals like the former president and calling him out to some sort of international courts and maybe holding him accountable so nobody else could do this in another developing country, we need to come together for some sort of solutions. I'm so devastated by the community's response. I've called out Islamic scholars to help me translate this Sharia on how Afghans can, especially Afghan women, can participate in the structure of society, that there's no response. I've called out other organizations, the United Nations responded so late after what happened to Afghanistan.
I wanted to, for a moment, linger on the situation in Afghanistan right now, because it does seem to me that, despite your having said, Zarifa, that women's rights was just a project for the international community, what we see today in Afghanistan is demonstrations by women, and it seems that this is actually the focal point of resistance to the Taliban. So it does seem to me that, first of all, women do play a very important role in Afghan civil society. And secondly, I wonder, do you think this is a consequence of the past 20 years? Or is it a consequence of a deeper strength of Afghan women? And what can it yield for the future of Afghanistan?
I have to clear this. I have said this too many times. I'm thankful of the interference the international community did 20 years back in Afghanistan. That time I was just, not so sure that I will become a mayor or someone who I could at least come and sit here to talk to you, because the situation was totally changed and now I'm here. They started on a change and they stepped for a change, but what we achieved, it was our struggles. As I said before, international community paid dollars, we paid lives, we paid struggles, we paid dreams, we paid hard work, we paid a big amount of hopes to come true. So first of all, it needs to be clear. And secondly, what about today goes on in Afghanistan, and what about we are watching it? I really don't hear what exactly is this. This is standing resistance, and sometimes when I'm watching it as an Afghan who left her country, and the moment when she was leaving country and she was boarding plane, it was harder than the moment she heard her dad died. And it was the same for me. And so as a data one, when I'm watching them, I feel like so proud of myself being a woman, being a fun woman. I really feel proud of myself being one of this new generation of Afghans. And the way they're standing, the way they're just standing there and they're just talking and about whatever it is, but they're having the bravery to speak out. It is something that really motivates me, always, especially when I see this woman. And this girl, main woman, I love the way they stand. I love the way they stood. I love the way they are speaking out for their rights, for their future, and today. And secondly, whatever exactly, why these women are there. If you watch some of these videos, most of these women are not those who have been working in offices, who have been working, or in NGOs. These are mostly those women who are just locally busy with their own lives. And now, amazingly, I watched a video. There were too many old women. They were shouting and they were saying that we don't want we don't want job. I don't want job. I don't want to work anywhere. The only thing that I want is just I don't want to see my daughters or my son's future be ruined, or someone could stop them to go to school. So I think it's whatever happens now in Afghanistan, yeah, we accepted the interference of the international community and what they did, but let's not forget it. in some point, the friendship with the international community was more like, the price we paid for this friendship was more and more big than being in a war within 20 years. This is something so clear, let's not forget it. The way people were, fleeing down from airplanes, it is something that history will not be able to forget it. The way people were, trying to get out to at least have a better future, and they faced the attack, and more than 200 people, civilians, got killed, and they got no future, no life at least. It was something that history will not forget it. And within this all, whatever we have funds are having, let's not forget it. It's all ours. It's all ours. The way women are standing today, there is no international community to support them. There are no media to support them. There are no NGOs to support them. No dollars, no people, no government, nothing. Women are standing themselves their ground. So the way their bravery standing, it's something that, let's try to admit it, Afghan women are more brave than what we are thinking about.
Graeme, I wonder, it seemed in the beginning that there were indications that the Taliban had changed their political views, at least in nuances, in particular on the question of the role of women in society. Now, what we are seeing, despite all the statements from Taliban representatives, is very violent crackdowns on these demonstrations. We see forced marriages. We see terrible pictures from Afghanistan. So what's actually going on now? Are we seeing that the Taliban weren't serious all along? Or are we seeing that the Taliban are among themselves fractured and there are different camps who follow different policies?
I think the shoe has yet to drop, in the sense that we don't yet know what a Taliban government really looks like. We saw this week the appointment of a cabinet, and that cabinet is pretty traditional, it's pretty mainstream Taliban. Some of the really, shall we say, more military-oriented Taliban did not get positions. A guy named Sadr Ibrahim, another guy named Qayyum Zakir, both of them were head of the Taliban Military Commission in recent years. Neither of them got jobs in the cabinet. One of them has apparently left Kabul now and gone back to Helmand, and so there's a question about Taliban cohesion that way. But then again, other people who were more on the progressive side of the Taliban did not get jobs. You saw in this film a guy named Amar Zmarak. He's a guy in his 30s. His girls are in school in Doha. And you saw him in the film say that the Taliban will be more progressive than you think. Well, he did not get a job so far in the new government. Another character you saw, Khair al-Khairwa, former interior minister. This week he became the new Minister of Information. So he's someone who probably comes from the more kind of political side of the Taliban, who will be in power to some extent. And so, these developments I'm telling you about only happened in the last couple of days. And so it is still very fluid, it's still very evolving. I would just say, as long as you can see things happening, that in itself is a good thing. The Taliban asked telecommunications executives to shut down cell phone signals in recent days from neighborhoods of Kabul that were protesting, and so you didn't see some of the things that were happening. And so I would say if you can see it, if there are protests on the streets of Kabul and there are journalists there covering those protests, then in some ways that suggests a society that's still more open than most of Central and South Asia. So let's wait and see.
the question also for Western governments is how to approach the Taliban and if to approach them at all. Should we negotiate with the Taliban? Should we try and find some mode of maybe even cooperating with them?
I think my question here is that if the United States, if the international community did not agree with the Taliban coming into power, then why evacuate? Is it because they didn't want to have the sole responsibility of the security that the United States was pretty much leading and then NATO allies were following? I'm quite confused by their communication, or why didn't they raise this concern for the past 2 years when negotiations were taking place? I think that 35 plus million people, lives are at stake here. Afghanistan was 99.9% a donor aid running economy. And right now, many of my girls and organizations have been let go because of the finances that are not coming through. A lot of businesses have taken a toll. The market economy is not even functioning. So are we going to allow the 35 plus million people to starve, to be in a more distraught, devastated state than they are already in because of not politically aligning with the Taliban? In order to support the people, you don't have to legitimize the Taliban. Communication with the Taliban doesn't mean that you could give them some sort of bilateral agreement, but there is a responsibility owed by the international community to the Afghan people, because the last 20 years, there is no clear indication of why the war was taking place. It's such a confusion especially to the young society of Afghanistan. You know that over 70%, up to 70% of the society is below the age of 25. So these are the members who've never really engaged with the Taliban. They have a bleak understanding of why the U.S. entered Afghanistan, but not a thorough understanding of what has taken place. So we owe it to these people, and we also don't want to leave Afghanistan how we left it after the collapse of the Soviet Union. One thing that's very important is that we've noticed that the Taliban are eager to have international recognition, and that is the carrot for international parties, to hold some sort of monitoring mechanism, to have some sort of benchmarks for these individuals to follow, and that should include human rights, that should include other crises, and to then work with them to somehow modernize them. One thing that we have to look at is, although we see a huge, a different political aspect, there's a change in how they present themselves, a large proportion of the Afghan Taliban are uneducated. They don't know how to run government institutions. They don't understand how to run biometrics, how electricity in the provinces are going to run. I mean, the airport was at a complete stop because the United States was pretty much functioning when they left. They had to contact the Qataris and the Turks to assist them. So we know that there's a technical skills gap, and for that, they're going to need assistance to run the country. So do we leave the country in a collapsed, devastated state and not assist them? It's something that I really struggle with, because it's wrong on a humanitarian level, it's wrong on a level of allied commitment that you have to the Afghan people. It's wrong for the youth that you've pretty much empowered and also made them believe that the Afghan Taliban were their enemies, and now they're pretty much functioning under the government of who they projected was their enemy. It's a huge psychological shock to these people, and we need to bring some sort of stability. That's prior.
First, let's not forget that within Taliban, Pakistan is again so bravely active in Afghanistan. And really, please not to ignore this. Within any discussion, let's not to ignore this. Yeah, we lacked talents, sources, people left Afghanistan, all educated people, technical people. There are like lack of everything in Afghanistan. But we have been, just yesterday, I was watching, reading some news on Twitter, the finance minister of Pakistan, they have been, proposed we can send to kind of talented and educated and technical people to Afghanistan so they can lead this financial issues in Afghanistan. First, like this.
Although Pakistan is a bankrupt country itself.
But still they say, they think, now Afghanistan is we got a news that after this, all business around the country in Afghanistan will be deal by Pakistan and by Pakistani culture. So some sort of news is like this. So the key 2 points to solve the problem, in my view, and I have been telling this everywhere since long time, since I'm out of Afghanistan. First, let's pressurize Pakistan before this fire burn your nation, your country. Because if we are not able to do this, I can give you an example. So shortly, we had some protests in U.S., Washington D.C., and too many other cities, and there was Black Lives Matter. And suddenly an attack happened, and a girl murdered some amount of people. And after investigations, they came to know that this girl was a Pakistani girl studying in a American university in US. So every problem around the world which is related to tourism ends to Pakistan, and the tails goes directly to Pakistan. So at least if you don't want you want the fire which is already fired in Afghanistan to burn your country, your people, your past and today and future, please let's pressurize Pakistan to stop interference and feeding tourists in Afghanistan. In 2001, I have been just watching the documentary. The President Bush, he stated that we need to bomb and finish the training centers of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, while he already knew what training centers were there in Kuwait, were there in Pakistan and Pasha went to. So first of all, let's pressurize Pakistan, so at least we would not see another country go through the same now going Afghanistan. At least this. And not doing the worst thing that human did to Afghan human in Afghanistan. Secondly, let's pressurize Taliban by the key points of legitimacy to their government and recognition of their government. If Taliban are now back in power, they will be for long time there. If they are for few time, if someone thinks that we can kick them out of Afghanistan once again, like 2001, it's just a dream which makes you laugh for a few seconds if you want to laugh. Just this. Because if international community or anyone else around the world were committed to not give Afghanistan as a gift once again to Pakistan and Taliban, they were not there in Afghanistan now. So yeah, they are there, they will be there, they are now reality on ground. So when they are reality on ground, if any other are not and more important, let's start negotiation with them. Let Afghan people to negotiate this. Let Afghan people to talk to them. I'm telling everyone, I'm telling here as well, I'm ready to talk to them on behalf of Afghan women, on behalf of my mom, on behalf of my sisters, on behalf of myself. I'm ready to talk to them. I'm ready to talk to them and negotiate what these Sharia laws are exactly, which they are always talking about. And so on, more topics. So these are the two key points to at least really can help us in realistic and being so realistic to the reality on ground and to the facts in Afghanistan.
How much do you think that corruption in that high level of government just contributed to the fall of the government? I mean, we discussed a few scenarios what happened during the last days. But of course, it is not just a 1 week incident. It goes way back and see the root cause the issue. I mean, you're an example itself. You got your appointment, but you are not allowed to work. It is not that just the views were so extremist that we can also see the administration, the corruption on your way to get your job. So if you can talk a little bit about that issue, thank you.
Well, I think that corruption, just to give some example, and I'm sure the Afghans even in the audience are well aware that corruption was such an embarrassment thing pre-Soviet invasion that the Afghan people would not stand for it. Anybody who would be corrupt in any means or forms would be exiled pretty much from their community. But Afghanistan that I worked in had corruption in its social fabric. From the man who was parking your car, from the woman who was the guard letting you into the airport, checking you through the security, from the person checking in your bag, from the person who is supposed to help you enter into ministries, to the top level ministers. Corruption was pretty much the foundation of the Afghan government, and in many forms. It's not only a cash-based corruption form, it's a favor-based, I will place you in this position if you provide me X, Y, and Z. And the problem was that we would talk about it in such a generic term, but we would never hold anyone responsible. We would talk about writing reports, but when it came down to it and evidence was presented that certain ministers were taking stealing $500 million from USAID projects, they would just get a slap on the hand or get removed from the position. They would not be sent to court or be held accountable. I think that Afghanistan was such a fresh government and such an eager young institution to be built on such horrible foundations, it was only bound to collapse. What to do in the future? I mean, it all depends on how to move forward. Right now, I don't know what kind of functioning government is going to be taking place in Afghanistan. There was just an interim government that was announced, but as soon as we notice if this is going to be some sort of democratic institution, but they've made it very clear that this is going to be an Emirates-run institution. And what we know of Emirates is that they are extremely harsh when it comes to punishments regarding topics like corruption or theft, etc.
The Taliban have a reputation for being slightly less corrupt than their predecessors. And so in early conversations, for example, a friend of mine is a telecommunications executive. He says that early meetings between the Taliban and the new Ministry for Telecommunications, it's actually going pretty smoothly so far. So let's see.
In the documentary, you talked about corruption, how like around a third of the money we kind of lose that with the UN aid. And I was wondering, how can we possibly, if it's the foreign communities as international people, how can we help to put a light on that kind of corruption and see where that money goes?
So what I will suggest is like, it's gone. Let's start a new chapter, close the chapter, whatever it was. But yeah, it was a good experience maybe for, let's learn from these 20 years and go ahead. What I will suggest to you, as you say, what we need to do next, especially in cause of funding, please don't trust the so-called NGOs organizations who are fighting like women's rights, human rights, children's rights, men rights. Okay, first of all, let's stop to really work on the ground. And most importantly, if you're not able to work in countrysides of Afghanistan, if you're not to bring some developments and mobilizations in countryside of Afghanistan, we are not able to bring peace to the cities of Afghanistan.